I woke at 3 in the morning to the kind of message that ends whatever is left of a family. Christmas is off. Expect a call from my lawyer. No greeting, no explanation, not even a period at the end. Just that thin strip of text glowing in the dark, cold and matter-of-fact, like he had been waiting for the perfect hour to deliver the blow. My first thought was not fear or confusion. It was a quiet observation I still remember clearly. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I typed understood and set the phone face down on the nightstand. I did not reread the message. I did not sit up and pace. I did not try to figure out what he thought he was accomplishing. I turned my head into the pillow and went back to sleep. If you have ever lived long enough under someone else's definition of duty, you learn to ration your emotional energy the way other people ration their savings. Maybe that is why a part of me already knew. Something was ending. Something else was finally beginning. I will tell you what I mean, but if any part of this reminds you of something you have lived through, feel free to take a breath now. I did not know it that night, but the real story started the next morning. Just after 7:15, when the sun hit my blinds in a way that made everything look a little too honest. I sat up slowly and reached for my glasses, still half inside the fog of sleep. For a moment, nothing in the room felt familiar, like I had woken in someone else's apartment. Then the memory of the message slid back into place and anchored the day. The ridiculous part was how normal everything else seemed. The hum of the heater in my little place in Dilworth. The muffled sound of a neighbor's dog barking downstairs. My phone where I left it, face down, waiting. I picked it up but did not bother opening the message again. I remembered it well enough. I padded into the kitchen, started the kettle, and leaned against the counter while the water heated. My coffee routine has always been the most stable part of my life. I measured the beans, ground them by hand because the cheap electric grinder gave everything a burnt smell, and set the pour-over up like a tiny morning ritual. It was only when the first stream of water hit the filter that I looked up at them. Clock. 7:21 in the morning. Not even 6 hours since he told me I would be hearing from his lawyer. I heard myself almost laugh, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity was finally impossible to ignore. A lawyer over Christmas. When the coffee was ready, I took my mug to the small table by the window. From that angle, I could see the street below, lined with the same oaks that always looked too tall for the neighborhood. Charlotte mornings have a way of pretending they are calm even when something is breaking underneath. I took a sip, set the mug down, and opened my laptop. I typed in the login for the mortgage account. The moment the dashboard loaded, the number hit me the same way it always did, $520,000. That was the outstanding balance on the house I had helped my parents buy 3 years earlier. The one I had never lived in. The one I did not own. The one I had co-signed for because my dad had looked me in the eyes and said he needed me. I had believed him, or maybe believed that good daughters step in when asked. Hard to say which illusion was stronger at the time. I stared at the screen a long moment before clicking through the menu. The option I needed was hidden behind 2 subpages and 1 warning message. Request removal from co-signer role listed under account restructuring. It was the kind of button you never expect to press because you assume the people you help will not weaponize your generosity. I read the disclosure carefully. A request like this triggers a full reassessment of the primary borrower's financial capacity. If the borrower does not meet the requirements on their own, the lender may demand immediate refinance, additional collateral, or in rare cases, full payoff. The consequences were spelled out in plain English. I think that mattered to me. Plain English has a way of clarifying what denial tries to blur. I clicked the beginning request. The form opened with fields I knew by heart. Name, address, relationship to borrower, reason for request. I stared at the blank line for a few seconds. The truth was too long to fit inside the box and too old to fix with 1 sentence. I typed change in circumstances. It was the cleanest version of reality I could offer. Then came the signature box, where I wrote my full name in steady letters. The steadiness surprised me even more than my hands earlier. My dad had expected panic. He had counted on it. What he got instead was a daughter finally done carrying what was never hers. When I hit submit, the page took a moment to process. A loading wheel spun in a calm little circle, almost gentle. Then the confirmation appeared. Your request has been received and will be reviewed within 5 to 7 business days. I exhaled, not dramatically, just slowly, like letting out air I had been holding for years without realizing. A second email came from the loan officer assigned to the file, a woman named Marianne. Her message was professional but not unkind. She explained that the reassessment would require updated documentation from the primary borrower. She reminded me that if he did not meet the debt-to-income threshold alone, the lender could not maintain the original loan terms. She asked me to confirm one last time that I understood the implications. I did. Fully. I typed my reply. Yes, I understand. Please proceed. I sat back in my chair, the quiet in my apartment stretching out like a blank page. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear my dad's voice borrowing all the old lines he favored. Family first, duty before comfort, do the right thing. Funny how none of those applied when he sent that message at 3 a.m. I took another sip of coffee. It had gone lukewarm but still tasted steady, which was enough. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the street. A dog barked again. The world kept moving in its ordinary way, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not fear, something quieter and strangely calm. Clarity. If you have ever lived through the moment when loyalty stops being a virtue and starts being a liability, you know the feeling. It settles in your chest like a new kind of gravity. I closed the laptop and set it aside. Part of me wanted to text my dad, ask him why he thought any of this would intimidate me, why he always reached for punishment before conversation. But another, the part that had finally grown tired of explaining my own worth to the people who should have known it, stayed silent. Silence can be a boundary too. My phone buzzed once on the table. Not a call from a lawyer, not a message from him, just an automated news alert about traffic on East Boulevard. For a moment, I watched the screen go dark again. I thought about how many years I had spent trying to keep the peace, smoothing things over, stepping in whenever the financial storms hit. I thought about how the weight of that mortgage had followed me everywhere, even into the choices I made about work and relationships, as if my life had been quietly collateralized without my consent. Maybe that was why the message at 3 a.m. did not shatter me the way he expected. You cannot shatter what you have already let go of. You can, however, decide what to build in its place. I stood, rinsed the mug, and placed it upside down in the rack. It was not even 8 o'clock yet. The day was just beginning, and I had no idea how ugly the fallout would get. I only knew one thing with absolute certainty. When my dad sent that message, he believed he was lighting a fuse under me. What he did not realize was that the fuse led straight back to him, and that was the thought sitting in my chest as I grabbed my bag and headed out the door. A simple line, steady and undeniable. This time, I was not the one who needed to be afraid. That thought carried me all the way down the stairs of my building, out into the cool Charlotte morning, and into my car. I sat there a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the engine idle while the neighborhood woke around me. A man in a puffer jacket jogged past with his dog. Someone scraped frost off a windshield across the street. Ordinary scenes, nothing dramatic, but they pressed against the memory of that 3 a.m. message in a way that made the past 3 years of my life surface like a file I had been avoiding. The house. That house. The one in Myers Park, with the wide front porch and the magnolia tree that shed leaves big enough to use as coasters. The house I helped buy even though I never intended to live there. The house my dad had insisted he needed to retire in. I had not thought about the beginning of it all in a while. Not the real beginning anyway. But that morning, with the reassessment process already ticking forward, the memory unspooled cleanly. It was early spring of 2021 when my dad first mentioned this house. I was 26 at the time, still trying to convince myself that the engineering job I had taken in Uptown. Charlotte was a good fit, working long hours and drinking terrible office coffee because it felt like the kind of thing adults did. My dad had called one Sunday morning while I was grocery shopping at the Harris Teeter on East Boulevard. His voice had that overly bright tone he used whenever he was rehearsing a favor, before saying it out loud. He asked if I had a minute. I remember pushing my cart aside near the bakery display and saying, sure. He launched into it so quickly I did not have time to brace myself. He had found a house he loved. It was perfect. It was in a safe neighborhood, It had everything he and my mom needed. He sounded like someone describing a dream, not a financial commitment that would outlive him by decades. I asked why he was telling me this. There was a small pause before he cleared his throat and said his credit score was not strong enough for a mortgage on his own, and his retirement income looked thinner, on paper, than he wanted. He said these things the way some people describe the weather. Nothing dramatic, just a slight cloud cover. He asked me to come with him to the bank the next week. He said it would help to have another applicant in the room. He said it would only be for show. A boost, a signature. His words made it sound like I would be holding open a door he intended to walk through on his own. I wanted to believe that. I think I needed to believe because the alternative would have required a kind of backbone I had not yet learned to use. The following Tuesday afternoon, I met him at a branch office on Providence Road. I remember the fluorescent lights humming faintly and the smell of new carpet. The loan officer was a woman in her 40s with a patient smile and a stack of point documents already laid out in front of her. She greeted my dad, then looked at me and asked if I was the cosigner. The word landed heavier than I expected. Not temporary assistance, not moral support. Cosigner. Fully responsible. I shot my dad a look and he gave me one of his reassuring half nods, the kind he used whenever he wanted me to fall in line without making a scene. The loan officer walked us through the packet. 30-year term, fixed interest, the principal amount far larger than anything I had imagined signing my name to. When she reached the deed paperwork, she was very clear. My name would not be on the ownership documents. The home would belong to my parents exclusively. As a cosigner, I would be entirely liable for the mortgage without holding any ownership rights. I should have paused longer. I should have asked harder questions. Instead, I sat there nodding like I always did. The loan officer asked if I understood. I said yes. My dad said it was just a formality, something to help him get approved. He promised he would handle the payments. He said he had run the numbers. He said he had a plan. That word plan should have meant something to me, but it floated right past. I signed where they told me to sign. The memory of that afternoon stayed with me on the drive to work. Signing my name had felt like such a small gesture at the time. I had been raised to believe that supporting your parents was not heroic, but expected. Normal. But 3 years later, looking back through the lens of that 3 a.m. text, I could see the shift more clearly. Signing had not been a gesture. It had been a transfer of responsibility, one I did not fully understand until the invoices started arriving. By the time the first mortgage payment came due, my dad called to tell me he was a little short that month. A hiccup, he said. Temporary. Could I cover just this one, and he would reimburse me right away? I said yes. When the second month came around, and he was short again, he repeated the same line. My mom added a soft sorry in the background, her voice nearly swallowed by his. By month 3, he did not bother with excuses. He simply told me the amount and when it needed to be paid. It was astonishing how quickly a burden becomes routine. I still have the emails flagged in my inbox. Monthly payment confirmation for $2,000 and change. Payment posted. Thank you. A series of receipts documenting the quiet erosion of my savings. Over the span of 3 years, I sent almost $70,000 into a house I never lived in. A house where my birthday card sat unopened on their mantle one year because they forgot I stopped by while rushing out to a dinner they had planned for themselves. I adjusted my life around those payments without noticing how sharply. I canceled a trip I had wanted to take to Portland. I put off replacing my aging car for another year. I did not quit my job even when the burnout felt like grit in my teeth every day. Because quitting would have been irresponsible with that mortgage hanging over me. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself it made me a good daughter. But there is a thin line between being a good daughter and being an unpaid safety net. You rarely see the line until you are standing on the wrong side of it. At work that morning after the reassessment request, I opened my inbox and saw an old message from the mortgage company. It was dated from late last year. Payment received. Thank you for your continued partnership. I stared at the phrase continued partnership until the words blurred. Partnership implies 2 parties working together. That had never been the arrangement. I had been an invisible pillar holding up a structure I did not benefit from. I took a break around mid-morning and walked outside the building. The air smelled faintly of mulch from the landscaping crew working near the entrance. I watched the traffic on South Tryon Street and tried to pinpoint the exact moment. Things had shifted from helping to obligation. It was not one moment, it was all of them. Each payment, each apologetic voicemail from my mom, each time my dad told me he would catch up soon, even though later I learned he had never intended to carry the full load. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app where my outgoing transfers were, listed in neat rows. Month after month, amount after amount. No missed payments, no delays. Every line is a record of my quiet compliance. Looking at those numbers in sequence did something to me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of awakening. This was not a partnership. This was not a family working together. This was a financial strategy, and I was the strategy. The realization did not come with fireworks or dramatic music. It settled instead like a stone in my chest, heavy and unavoidable. My dad had never wanted me next to him in that mortgage office as a symbol of family support. He needed my name, my credit, my paycheck. I was not the daughter who happened to help. I was the solution he had been waiting for. A walking line of credit with a pulse. Around noon, my phone buzzed twice. Not my dad. Not yet. Just work reminders. Meetings. Deadlines. Normal life continues alongside the undercurrent of something larger shifting beneath it. I slipped the phone back into my purse and headed toward the office door. I had a meeting in 10 minutes. My heart felt steady. My mind felt clearer than it had in years. What surprised me most was not the financial weight I had been carrying. It was how naturally I had accepted it. How unquestioned. How expected. How easily a person can be moved from family member to financial infrastructure without ever noticing the migration. I walked back inside and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. My reflection stared back at me in the elevator doors. Same hair, same tired eyes. But behind those eyes, something had shifted. I could feel it. A thought forming, taking shape, settling in with unmistakable truth. I had not been included in that mortgage to help my parents step into a better life. I had been recruited, positioned, utilized. And once you see a role like that for what it is, you cannot unsee it. Not even if you wanted to. I stepped out of the elevator, smoothed my jacket, and headed down the hall toward the conference room, carrying the weight of that clarity with me, steady as a pulse leading me into whatever came next. I walked into the conference room carrying that new clarity with me. But the strangest thing happened once the meeting started. My mind drifted, not in the usual distracted way, but in a pulled downward way, like something old had finally worked its way to the surface and decided it wanted my attention. I watched a coworker trace a diagram on the whiteboard, his marker squeaking in short bursts, and behind that sound I heard another sound entirely. My dad's voice, the tone he used whenever he talked about the one subject he kept sealed shut yet, somehow managed to let drip into my childhood like a slow leak. My brother. The one who died before I was born. I sat there, pen in my hand, nodding mechanically as someone reviewed project numbers, but a different set of numbers filled my mind. Years, dates, gaps, all of them tied to a name I was never supposed to say out loud. Lucas, the brother who was gone long before I arrived. The brother my dad claimed had been taken too early by a car accident somewhere, outside Asheville. The brother my dad almost never discussed. Not directly. Not without tension cinching his voice tight. He would say it was too painful. He would say some losses do not need to be revisited. Then he would change the subject. Growing up, I learned very quickly not to ask questions. The first time I tried, I was 7. I remember leaning against the kitchen counter while my mom stirred a pot of chan, something on the stove, the smell of tomato paste heavy in the air. I asked what Lucas had liked to do, or if he had a favorite color. My mom froze. Her spoon paused above the pan, and she said softly that we do not ask things that make your dad sad. Then she patted my shoulder, her hand light, almost apologetic, and said it was better to let the past rest. So the past rested. It rested for decades. I did not push, and my dad did not offer. Instead, Lucas became a shape I could never quite make out, defined only by absence. A missing puzzle piece that everyone pretended completed the picture, even though. The empty space was plain. As the meeting ended, people gathered their papers, conversations starting and stopping in small bursts around me. I walked back to my desk and sat down, staring at my computer screen. A spreadsheet glowed in front of me, rows and columns lined up neatly, everything categorized, quantified. I liked spreadsheets. They made sense. But families do not run on rows and columns. And ghosts certainly do not. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk, not because I expected to find anything related to Lucas, but because I needed something to ground me. A forgotten snack, a pen, anything. Instead, I found the envelope my dad had given me 3 years earlier. I had forgotten I kept it here. It was thin and already worn at the edges from being moved around so often. He had handed it to me the night I signed the mortgage papers. Not a gift. Not even really a gesture, more like something he felt obligated to pass along. Inside were 2 photographs and a program from a funeral I had never attended. I had looked at them once when he first gave them to me, but the images had felt too foreign, like someone else's memories that had mistakenly landed in my hands. I never threw them away, though. Something about that felt wrong, disrespectful. But I never displayed them either. They lived in this drawer, untouched, suspended somewhere between acknowledgement and denial. I lifted the envelope and slid the photographs out again. The first image showed a teenage boy standing next to a dark blue pickup truck. He had my dad's eyes, the same determined set to the jaw, the same unruly wave in his hair. He looked maybe 16 or 17. Hard to tell. The second photo showed him at a lake, water up to his knees, smiling in a way that made me wonder how a grin like that could survive only in a picture, and not in stories, or memories, or even an occasional anecdote at dinner. I stared at his face and tried to feel something defined. Grief, connection, curiosity. But mostly what I felt was the strange discomfort of looking at a stranger who everyone insisted was part of me. The funeral program listed his age as 18. It listed his favorite hymn, his high school, and one short line near the bottom, survived by his loving parents. No mention of me, because I did not exist yet. My existence had not even been conceptualized. I was not the child who had lost a sibling. I was the child who was born because there was space left behind. I slid the photographs back into the envelope and closed the drawer, but the thoughts did not close with it. They followed me through the afternoon, while drafting reports, while returning emails, while sipping lukewarm coffee that had been reheated twice. Lucas, a name never spoken freely, a presence never displayed. My dad kept no framed pictures of him in the living room. No trophies on shelves. No certificates on the walls. It was as though the future had swallowed the past whole, leaving behind only a silence that shaped everything that came after. It was not until I got home that evening that the weight of it finally pressed in. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the edge of the sink, the tile cold beneath my palms. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. That stillness always gave my thoughts too much room. I walked to the hall closet and dragged down a plastic storage bin. The lid was dusty. I had not opened it in years. Inside were old journals, photos from school, letters from people I no longer kept in touch with, and a few boxes my mom had packed for me when I moved out. I sifted through it, not looking for anything in particular, just following a feeling that there was something in here that might fill a gap. Somewhere near the bottom, beneath a stack of old holiday cards, I found a small notebook with a cracked spine. Not mine. My mom's handwriting curled across the cover. Notes. I opened it, flipping through grocery lists, reminders, and little snippets of her days. Then near the back, I saw it. A single page titled, "For When She Asks." My breath caught. The handwriting was shakier here, more deliberate, as if she had written it when she thought someone might be reading over her shoulder. It listed short sentences, facts maybe, or partial truths. Lucas was a good boy. He loved baseball. He helped around the house. He was taken too soon. The last line made my throat tighten. Do not ask your dad. It hurts him too much. I closed the notebook and stared at the wall. That was the narrative I had inherited. A boy who lived briefly, perfectly, and then vanished. A boy whose memory was held so tenderly that any mention of him felt like a trespass. But perfection is always suspicious. People are never perfect. They are flawed and messy and contradictory. Yet Lucas, the Lucas presented to me, had no edges, no stories of mistakes, no tales of rebellion or teenage moodiness, just a flawless silhouette held up against a light I could never reach. That realization slid in quietly but firmly. The perfection had not been accidental. It had been curated. And I had been raised in its shadow. I sat down on the floor with my back against the couch. The notebook rested in my lap. When I was growing up, my dad had a way of saying things that sounded like compliments, but felt like assignments. Lucas would have loved how organized you are. Lucas always wanted to be an engineer. Lucas would have been proud you made the honor roll. At the time, I thought he was including me in something meaningful, keeping Lucas alive through connection. But now, with distance and age and a bank reassessment process already moving faster than any apology from my dad ever had, I could hear the subtext more clearly. I was not being compared to Lucas. I was being molded into him. I looked around my apartment, at the neutral-colored walls, the simple furniture, the carefully arranged shelf where I kept work binders. My life felt tidy, restrained, manageable. But beneath that order, I felt something unravel, not in a chaotic way, but in a way that revealed a truth I had never dared examine directly. I was not raised to be myself. I was raised to fill a vacancy, a role, a placeholder for someone who existed only in the stories my dad selectively shared. Lucas had died before I took my first breath, yet his presence had been the engine behind countless decisions made on my behalf. Sitting there on the floor, I realized I had been orbiting a ghost for almost 30 years. I folded the notebook shut and placed it aside. My chest felt tight. Not with grief exactly, but with recognition. A recognition that explained more than I wanted it to. Why did my dad react so strongly when I strayed from the path he preferred? Why he never celebrated my milestones without attaching them to someone else's legacy? Why the mortgage situation felt less like a request and more like an expectation, rooted in something older than financial need? It all connected back to Lucas, the brother I never met. The brother I could never compete with. The brother whose absence became the shape of my life. I stood up slowly and switched on a lamp by the couch. The room brightened in a soft glow, but it did nothing to dim the truth settling inside me. I had spent years trying to be good, trying to be agreeable, trying to be worthy of praise that always seemed meant for someone else. Now I finally understood why it never felt like praise. It was never meant for me, and understanding that changed everything. It was never meant for me. That thought stayed with me the entire night, thread through my sleep in fragments that pulled me awake every few hours. By morning, I felt like someone had loosened the floorboards beneath my life and was waiting for me to notice just how uneven everything had always been. I made coffee, sat at the small table by the window, and told myself to focus on work, on emails, on anything besides ghosts with perfect smiles and funeral programs printed before I ever learned to walk. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw my dad's name. My stomach tightened. I let it ring twice before picking up. His voice sounded strained, careful in the way people sound when they are about to ask for something but want to pretend they are not. He said he had gotten more blood work done at his last checkup. He said the results were not great. He said chronic kidney disease ran in his family, something he had not mentioned before. He said the doctor recommended a family screening. Nothing dramatic, he added, just precaution. He said it quickly, as though rushing past the part that mattered. I asked what that meant. He said they would take some blood, check compatibility, and evaluate how healthy potential donors were. He said it again, just precaution. I heard the faint clink of a mug somewhere on his end of the line, the sound of my mom moving in the kitchen. She did not say anything. She never did when the topic had weight. I asked him if he was okay. He said it was an early stage, manageable, but the doctor wanted to be proactive. He said families stepping in early could make a difference later. Then he asked if I could go for the screening. Just a small appointment at the medical center off Randolph Road. I could schedule it any time. It would help him. His voice dipped lower on that last part. I said yes before I thought about it. I always said yes. This was my dad, the man who raised me, the man who asked so little from me besides everything. Agreeing felt automatic. Later that afternoon, I called the transplant coordination office and scheduled the screening. The woman on the phone sounded cheerful in that efficient medical office way, confirming dates and times, mentioning forms I would need to fill out. I wrote everything down, tucked the paper into my planner, and tried to bury the small flicker of unease sitting under my ribs. On the morning of the appointment, I left work early and drove to the medical center. The parking lot was crowded, filled with minivans and sedans, and people walking briskly toward appointments they have probably wished they could skip. I checked in at the front desk, handed over my ID, and took a clipboard of forms to fill out. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and artificial lavender. A television mounted high in the corner played a muted cooking show where someone drizzled sauce over something I could not identify. I answered questions about my medical history, medications, allergies, surgeries. Easy enough, but halfway down the second page, I noticed a section titled Recipient Information. It asked for the name of the person I was being evaluated to help. I paused. I had assumed they would fill that out themselves. I left it blank. After a few minutes, a staff member in scrubs called my name. She led me down a hallway lined with framed photographs of smiling families holding hands, the kind of images medical centers use to suggest hope. We entered a small exam room where she asked for my forms and typed my information into a computer. Then she asked a question that froze me where I sat. "Can you confirm the recipient name for verification?" Her tone was brisk, neutral. I said my dad's name. She frowned slightly. "Are you sure?" I said yes. She checked the screen again, then turned it slightly toward me. "According to our system, you are here for compatibility evaluation for potential donation to Lucas Hale." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. The room felt too bright, the air too thin. I asked her to repeat it. She did, slowly this time, as if she thought I had not understood the first time. "Lucas Hale, the recipient name listed on the referral." I stared at the spelling, the shape of the letters. Hale. My last name. My family name. Lucas. The name I had only known through funeral programs and my dad's quiet avoidance. My dad had not told me this screening had anything to do with Lucas. He had not even acknowledged Lucas as a possibility. He said it was for him. Just precaution. Just proactive planning. I felt something cold run through me, steady and deep. I asked the staff member where the referral came from. She checked the screen again. The referring physician was located in Asheville, the city where my dad had said the accident happened. The accident that supposedly took Lucas's life. I turned those pieces over in my mind, trying to force them to fit the version of reality I had been given. But they did not. They could not. I asked the staff member if she had any other information. She apologized and said medical privacy laws required the office to wait for a supervising coordinator to answer detailed questions, but the name on the referral was correct. The evaluation I had been scheduled for was not for my dad. It was not even adjacent to his medical records. It belonged to someone named Lucas Hale. My heartbeat felt loud inside my ears. I stood up abruptly, mumbling something about needing a minute. She looked concerned and asked if I was feeling faint. I said no. I walked into the hallway and leaned against the wall, pressing my palm against the cool paint, grounding myself with the chilled surface. The floor felt unsteady. The lights felt too sharp. If Lucas was dead, why did his name appear in an active donor evaluation system? If he was alive, why had my dad lied for 30 years? Why had he said, car accident? Why had he kept every detail vague? Why had there been no photographs in the house? Why had my mom avoided mentioning him at all costs? Why had my dad handed me a funeral program if the person being memorialized had never been buried? The edges of the truth sharpened too quickly, almost violently. I felt anger rise, but it was not the kind that burned hot. It was cold, focused, the kind that comes from betrayal so deep it rearranges what you think you know about your own childhood. I walked back into the exam room and told the staff member I needed to cancel the screening. She asked if I wanted to reschedule. I said no. She hesitated and offered to connect me with a coordinator. I shook my head. My voice came out steady, even though my hands had started to tremble. I said I should not be here. Not under these circumstances. As I stepped out into the hallway again, I could feel her eyes on me. Sympathy and confusion mixed together. I kept walking, ignoring the weight of the air around me. I moved past a line of patients waiting with clipboards, past a nurse pushing a medication cart, past the cheerful photographs and the soft lavender scent that suddenly felt sickening. Outside, the air was cool, a thin breeze brushing against my face. I walked toward my car in quick steps, my pulse pounding. I unlocked the door, slid inside, and closed it behind me. The quiet inside the car felt unreal. I gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead, trying to decide whether to scream or laugh or cry. I took out my phone and called my dad. He answered on the third ring. His voice sounded normal, even casual, as though he had been expecting my call to be a simple confirmation that I had completed the screening. I could hear the television faintly in the background, some game show with bells ringing. My mom said something quietly, her voice muffled. I asked him who the screening was for. He said it was for him. I asked again, more pointedly. He insisted it was for him. I said I had been told otherwise. Silence. A thick, weighted silence that felt like an admission all by itself. I told him the name the hospital had on file. Lucas Hale. Another long silence followed, deep enough that I could hear my own breath catching. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Not angry, not panicking. He said sometimes the past resurfaces in ways we do not expect. He said he thought he could handle things without involving me. He said I needed to understand that family responsibilities do not disappear. My hands tightened around the wheel. I asked if Lucas was alive. He did not answer. He skirted around the question, said everything is complicated, said families have history, said sometimes we do not choose the roles we must play. All the words he used when he did not want to tell the truth. My mom's voice came through faintly again, asking if everything was okay. He did not answer her either. I told him I would not continue with the screening. He said I was making an emotional decision. He said I needed to think about what family means. He said he expected more from me. I hung up. The silence in the car after that was sharp enough to cut. I sat there, staring through the windshield at nothing, letting the realization settle. My dad had lied. Again. Not a small lie, a foundational lie. A lie that rewrote everything I thought I understood about my life. Lucas was not just a ghost. He was alive, somewhere. And my dad had not only kept that from me, but had attempted to involve me in a medical process tied directly to him, without telling me the truth. The betrayal hit in layers. First shock. Then confusion. Then anger was so steady and cold it felt like it settled into my bones. I sat in the parking lot for several minutes, letting the weight of it press down until it became something solid, something I could hold, something that would eventually shape what I needed to do next. But in that moment, all I could do was sit still and breathe as the life I thought I understood cracked, open in a way I could never have imagined. The truth had landed, and there was no unlearning it now. Lucas was alive. My dad had lied. My entire childhood had been built around a story that was not just incomplete, but deliberately manufactured. And now he expected me to step into a role I had never agreed to play. The sky above the lot was pale blue, too calm for what was unraveling inside me. Cars pulled in and out, people going about their day, carrying coffee cups and backpacks and medical folders, all of them unaware that my life had just split cleanly into a before and after. I finally picked up my phone again. My dad answered before the second ring, as if he had been staring at the screen, waiting. He asked if everything went smoothly. My voice came out quieter than I expected, almost level. I asked him why the referral listed Lucas as the recipient. Silence. Not the startled kind. The calculating kind. The kind that tells you the person on the other end is building the next sentence, carefully, trying to decide how much truth to let out. He said the hospital must have mixed something up. I told him the staff member confirmed it. Another pause. Then he exhaled, long and heavy, like this was not a revelation, but an inconvenience. He said he had hoped to wait until the right moment to explain that some things are difficult to talk about, that family history is complicated. He spoke in circles, padded with softness, avoiding the one sentence that mattered. So I said it to him. Lucas is alive. He did not deny it. He just said finally, yes. The word hit me harder than any lie could have. He explained it the way someone explains a weather pattern. Clinical, detached. Lucas had health issues. He had been dealing with kidney failure for some time. The doctors had been monitoring his condition. They felt a family match could make a difference. And because I was biologically his sibling, I was the obvious candidate. I reminded him I had never met Lucas. Not once. Not even as a baby. He reminded me that biology still matters. I asked why I had been told my entire life that Lucas died. My dad inhaled sharply, then said some things are too painful to revisit. Painful for him, he meant. Convenient, if I was being honest. I asked how long he had known Lucas was alive. He said a while. I asked how long Lucas had been sick. He said longer than he wanted to admit. I asked why he lied to me about why I was being screened at the hospital. He said he needed to make sure I showed up. If he had told me it was for Lucas, he said, I might have hesitated. Hesitated, as if hesitation, in this context, was a flaw. My throat tightened. I asked why I was only being told now. He repeated the same line. Some things are difficult. Families do not always handle grief or truth in perfect order. He said all of this like he was reading from a script he had rehearsed. A script where the audience was supposed to nod and accept. I asked him why he thought lying would get him what he wanted. He said, because this is family, and family takes care of each other. His voice grew firmer as he continued. He said some responsibilities are not optional. He said family obligations are bigger than personal discomfort. Then he delivered the sentence that welded itself into my memory. It is your duty. Duty. The word felt like an anchor slammed onto my chest. Heavy, uninvited, final. I asked if my mom knew. He hesitated again, then said yes, she had known. She was there when Lucas reconnected. She knew about the disease. She knew about the referral. She had said nothing to me. Nothing at all. I could hear her in the background, speaking softly, asking what was happening. My dad lowered his voice, muffling her words. I asked him if he understood what he was asking of me. A surgery. A lifetime medical implication. A permanent consequence. For someone I only knew as a ghost my whole life. Someone whose existence had been weaponized into expectation. He said this is what families do. We sacrifice. We step up. We fill in the gaps. We repair what fate has broken. He said I had always been dependable, strong, capable. He said Lucas needed me, that this was my chance to do something meaningful. Meaningful, as if everything I had already done meant nothing. My voice came out steady, clear. I said no. He did not understand at first. He thought I meant no for today. No until I got more information. No because I was emotional. He said we could revisit the conversation, that I had time to process. He kept talking past me, trying to negotiate a better version of my refusal. I said no again, louder this time. The kind that closes doors, not opens them. He sounded genuinely offended. He asked how I could abandon my own family. He asked what kind of person refuses to help an ill sibling. He asked what I thought my purpose was, if not to support the people who raised me. I heard my mom whisper something in the background. She did not sound shocked. She did not sound upset. She sounded resigned, the way she always did when my dad was determined to push something through. I told him I would not be part of something built on lies. I said I deserved honesty. I said he had forfeited the right to ask anything of me the moment he decided I did not deserve the truth. He called me dramatic. He said I was letting emotion cloud judgment. He said I did not understand the stakes. He said Lucas did not have time for my stubbornness. I felt something in me sharpen. I told him I was not being stubborn. I was being clear. I would not participate. Not now, not ever. The silence that followed was short, but potent. I imagined him gripping the phone, jaw tight, frustration pouring through the line. He asked me to think about what I was doing. I said I already had. He asked me to consider the consequences. I said I already had. He asked me to remember my place in the family. I said I already knew it. And that was the problem. He said if I walked away from this, things would change. I told him they already had. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the car as the sun slid lower behind the hospital buildings, painting everything in long shadows. I stayed until the chill seeped through my coat, until my fingers no longer trembled, until the weight of the conversation settled into something immovable. I drove home without turning on the radio. Just silence. A silence thick enough to think in. To breathe in, to finally admit that my dad had orchestrated my life the way some people prune a tree. cutting away the branches that did not grow toward the shape he wanted. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and stood there for a minute, leaning against the wood, letting the quiet settle. My phone buzzed twice. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. I walked to the counter and looked at the screen. A missed call from my dad. A text from my mom asking if I was okay. Another missed call. Then, as I set the phone down, another text came through. Short, cold, delivered with the same precision as the 3 a.m. message that would arrive days later, but carrying the same emotional weight. Christmas is off. No explanation, no apology, no effort to bridge the chasm he had created. I stared at the words. Christmas had always been the one holiday he insisted we spend together, a tradition, a rule. Now it was a weapon, or maybe a boundary drawn in anger. Either way, it was his message, his announcement that my refusal had consequences. I stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, phone glowing in my hand, and felt the familiar ache of being the outsider in my own family. But beneath that ache, something steadier had taken root. A sense of clarity, a sense of self-preservation, a recognition that duty is not something you inherit simply because someone else says it is. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to the living room window. Outside, the streetlights had flickered on, casting a warm glow across the sidewalk. Cars drove by, their headlights gliding across the pavement. Life moved on, quietly, without permission or instruction. I set my phone on the table and sank onto the couch, letting the weight of the day settle slowly, piece by piece. I had said no, fully, without softening or explanation. And even though everything around me felt cracked, something inside me finally felt solid. I sat there until the room grew darker and the tension inside me settled into something still. Something steady, something that would guide me through whatever came next. The room had grown so still that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I stayed on the couch long after the street outside quieted, letting the stillness settle into my bones. I thought having clarity would feel cleaner, lighter. But clarity comes with its own kind of weight, a heavier one, because once you see the truth, you cannot pretend blindness again. I went to bed sometime after midnight, not quite tired, not quite awake. Lying there in a long stretch of silence I had never allowed myself before. 2 days passed before the first call came from the bank. Not from my dad, not from my mom, not from any relative trying to bridge the gap. The bank moved first. That part should not have surprised me, but it did. Systems, I would later realize, always react faster than family. I was in my office at the marketing firm, a low brick building off Moorhead Street in Charlotte. My team was on a conference call in the next room, voices rising and falling in muffled waves. I glanced at my phone when it buzzed, expecting a spam caller, or maybe one of the retail clients who never read their emails before calling to ask the same questions. Instead, I saw the name of the mortgage lender, the same company whose website I had logged into late at night asking to remove myself from the $520,000 loan. I stepped into the hallway and answered. The representative introduced herself, her tone professional but edged with a kind of deliberate calm I knew well from years of managing clients in crisis mode. She said they had received my request to be removed from the mortgage and that the file had been escalated for reassessment. She asked if I had a few minutes to go over the next steps. I said yes. She explained the procedure slowly, almost like she had learned to pace her words according to the fragility of the person on the other end. To remove a cosigner without refinancing, the primary borrower must undergo a full evaluation. Income verification, debt-to-income ratios, credit history, asset review. She listed the requirements like items in a long pantry inventory. And then came the part I already knew, but felt heavier hearing out loud. If the primary borrower did not qualify a loan, the lender had the legal right to demand a cure, which could mean bringing the loan current if there were deficiencies, or paying down portions of it, or if the financial picture could not meet minimum thresholds, preparing for a payoff or forced sale. The words landed hard, even though her tone stayed even. She continued, explaining that because the mortgage amount was substantial, and because the loan was not new, the lender had to complete the process within strict regulatory timelines. That meant the reassessment needed to begin immediately. She asked if I wanted an emailed copy of the notice. I said yes. Right after we hung up, the email appeared. The subject line read something plain and clinical like reassessment initiated. Inside was a long block of text detailing everything she had already told me, as well as a deadline printed clearly near the top. 10 business days. If my dad did not submit all required documentation by then, the lender would move to the next step. The language softened the severity, but did not change it. Deferred options, mitigation pathways, potential resolution strategies. The terms were polite for consequences. I leaned against the hallway wall and let the words settle. I had expected something to come eventually from the bank. I had not expected it to come this fast. When I returned to my desk, my inbox showed 2 unread messages from clients and 1 from my team. I stared at the screen without opening anything. I felt like I had stepped into a different kind of time. A slower one, where each new fact stretched outward in all directions. By lunchtime, my phone had begun buzzing intermittently. Unknown numbers, a few local, 1 from Asheville. I ignored them at first. I figured they were follow-up calls from the lender, maybe different departments handling different parts of the process. Then I saw one from a number I recognized. It belonged to the regional office of the lender. I answered. Another representative spoke. This one sounded more formal, less conversational. He said the reassessment file required additional documentation related to previous payments from the cosigner. They needed confirmation of my financial contributions over the past 3 years so they could separate my history from the primary borrower. He asked if I could upload statements verifying my payments. I said I could and would do so by the end of the day. He then explained something I had not considered. The lender needed to evaluate whether my removal from the loan constituted a material change in risk. For mortgages of this size, a material change could trigger elevated oversight. Not punitive, he added, but cautious. Cautious, a word used when holding something fragile at the fingertips. I spent the next hour downloading statements and organizing them into a neat digital folder. Dozens of transfers, each one labeled mortgage support or parental loan assist or housing help. All the little sacrifices I had made without thinking about what they accumulated into. Nearly $70,000 by my rough tally. That number looked different on a screen than it did in my mind. Numbers always tell their own story, but sometimes you do not realize you are reading it backward. As the afternoon went on, the calls increased. I silenced my phone during a team meeting, only to turn it back on and find 9 missed calls from numbers I did not recognize. A few left voicemails. I listened to one, a polite but urgent message reminding me of the timelines and asking for confirmation that I had submitted my documents. I had, but the system was clearly moving faster than its employees could coordinate. By 5 in the afternoon, the number of missed calls had climbed into double digits. 17. Then 20. Then 24. I had expected my dad to call by now, but he had not. My mom had not either. The bank was more responsive than my family. More communicative, more invested in the reality of what was happening. When I got home, I changed out of my work clothes and reheated leftover food from the night before. The kitchen felt too quiet. My phone sat on the counter, vibrating every few minutes. I picked it up and saw new missed calls, 28, then 32. Many from the lender, a few from out-of-state numbers. Asheville again. I let them all go to voicemail. Around 8 in the evening, the lender called again. I answered this time. The representative asked if I had a moment. I sat down at the table and said yes. He explained that the reassessment had formally begun. They had contacted the primary borrower at the number on file, but had not yet reached him. He said they would continue to try. He said they needed verification within the next day or 2 to keep the process moving smoothly. He said the system automatically generated alerts when a loan reassessment involved removal of a cosigner on a high-value property. This was standard, not a cause for alarm. But it did require prompt cooperation. I asked if there was anything else needed from me. He said not at the moment. My portion was complete. When we hung up, I glanced again at my missed call count, 37. It felt surreal. The bank wanted answers. The bank wanted documentation. The bank wanted clarity. My family, meanwhile, had gone silent. It was nearly 9 when the first call from my parents' home number came in. I stared at the screen but let it ring. A minute later, it rang again. I did not answer. After the 3rd attempt, I finally listened to the voicemail. It was my mom. Her voice was soft, tired. She said she hoped I was okay. She said my dad was stressed. She said things had gotten complicated. She said we should talk when everyone is calmer. I did not call back. By 10 in the evening, the missed call count had reached 40. Most from the lender, a few from the Asheville area, a handful from my parents. I sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath me, phone in hand, watching the numbers climb. The silence in my apartment felt oddly companionable compared to the frantic energy buzzing through my phone. Before I went to bed, the lender called again. This time, the representative sounded slightly apologetic. The system had flagged the file for priority follow-up. He asked me to confirm once more that I had submitted everything. I assured him I had. He said thank you. Then he said something that stayed with me, something delivered without emotion or insight, yet cutting in its plain truth. He said it is unusual for us to begin hearing from relatives only after the reassessment starts. Typically, the primary borrower reaches out within hours. I paused. He was not trying to tell me anything beyond the procedural, but the implication was clear. The bank reacted faster than the people who raised me. I ended the call and set my phone face down on the table. When I finally checked the missed call count again before going to bed, the number glowed bright on the screen. 47. Then, as I watched, another call came in. Then another. By the time I turned the phone to silent and placed it on my nightstand, the count had reached 50. I lay in the dark, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan above me. I had expected consequences for saying no to my dad. I had expected anger, maybe resentment. I had not expected the first wave of pressure and urgency to come from a system, rather than the man who insisted family obligations outweigh everything else. In the quiet of the room, another vibration hummed against the nightstand, then another. The number kept climbing. 54, 57, 60. I turned the phone over. One more missed call appeared. 61. I let it ring once and fall into silence again. Somewhere between that silence and the next vibration, I realized the strangest part of all. The bank was not punishing me. It was simply following procedure. Families punish. Institutions notify. When I finally shut my eyes, the missed call count had reached 67. A number I would remember not because of what it meant financially, but because it told a clearer truth about where I stood in my own family than anything my dad had ever said. By morning, the missed call count had stopped rising, but only because my phone had given up and switched itself into a low power mode. The screen lit faintly when I moved it, the number 67 still sitting there like a quiet accusation. I plugged it in, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table while the apartment filled with that familiar bitter smell. For a moment, I tried to pretend it was an ordinary day, that the lender's emails were just routine updates, that the silence from my parents meant nothing. But ordinary days do not start with 67 missed calls and a family mortgaged to the bone. The first call that morning came at 8:13. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me already knew it was not the bank this time. I answered anyway. The man on the line introduced himself slowly, with the tone of someone used to people recognizing his name. He said he represented my parents. He said he was hoping we could discuss the situation reasonably, as a family, before things escalated further. I leaned back in my chair. My coffee was still too hot to drink, so I wrapped both hands around the mug and listened. He said he understood there had been a disagreement. He said my dad was very distressed. He said the mortgage reassessment had caused unnecessary panic. He said this entire conflict could be settled if I simply withdrew my request and restored things to how they had been. For a moment, I thought of saying nothing. Silence can be its own form of clarity. But old habits die hard, and I still had enough of the good daughter reflex left to respond politely. I asked him what exactly he had been told. He paused. Lawyers do not like pauses. Pauses reveal gaps. He eventually said that according to my dad, I had acted impulsively, that I had misunderstood the nature of the family medical situation. Those emotions had run high, that Christmas plans had been temporarily canceled due to stress. Temporary, as if the 3 a.m. text threatening legal action were a minor scheduling note. I let him finish. Then I asked the question that broke the surface. I asked him if my dad had mentioned why I withdrew from the hospital screening. He hesitated again. Another pause. He said he understood there had been confusion at the appointment. I corrected him. I said there had been no confusion, only deception. I told him I was asked to screen as a potential donor for my dad, but when the hospital staff verified the recipient, the name on the file was not my dad's. It was Lucas Hale, a name I had not been prepared to hear in any context other than a childhood tragedy. The line stayed silent for several seconds. I imagined him sitting at a polished desk, surrounded by neat stacks of paper, blinking slowly as the story shifted under his feet. I told him my dad had lied, that he had maneuvered me into a medical process under false pretenses, that I had walked out because no person with any sense of self-preservation would stay after learning they were being evaluated to give up a piece of their body for someone they had never met. Someone they had only been told was dead. He cleared his throat. When a lawyer clears his throat, it means the script he prepared is no longer useful. He asked if I was certain about the name. I said yes. I said I heard it directly from the hospital administrator, who looked confused that I seemed surprised. I said I left the hospital shaking, because the world I thought I understood had split open in a way I had not asked for. The lawyer's tone changed almost imperceptibly. It shifted from controlled confidence to something quieter, something more careful. He said he needed to gather additional information. He said he would speak with my dad and my mom again. He said he would call me back. He ended the call quickly, almost abruptly, as if he needed to check the ground beneath his own feet. I sat there for a long moment. My coffee had cooled enough to sip. I took a drink, the bitterness grounding me. Outside, the street was waking up. Cars moved through the intersection on Dilworth Road, slow at first, then steadier. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I started a load of dishes just to give my hands something to do. My phone buzzed again at 9:07, the same number. His voice was different. Gone was the smooth confidence, the polite authority. What remained sounded strained. He said he had spoken with my dad. He had asked direct questions. And he had received indirect answers. Too many indirect answers. He said he had also spoken briefly with my mom. She confirmed pieces of the story. Not all of them. Not enough to make sense. But enough to confirm that something essential had not been disclosed to him when he agreed to represent them. He said he had not been told about the identity of the actual transplant recipient. He had not been told about my dad misrepresenting his medical status. He had not been told about the 3 a.m. text threatening legal action. He had not been told about the mortgage reassessment being triggered by my withdrawal as cosigner. He paused, then said something I had not expected. He said that continuing to represent my dad under these circumstances would create an ethical conflict for him. He said he could not pursue legal action on behalf of a client who had withheld material facts, especially facts concerning another person's medical autonomy. He said he was formally withdrawing from the matter effective immediately. I did not speak right away, not because I needed time to process, but because I wanted to hear the quiet settling around his words. He continued. He said for my peace of mind, I should know that I had acted fully within my rights. No lender could compel me to remain a cosigner. No family member could force me into a medical evaluation under false pretenses. No parent could claim legal standing to demand an organ from an adult child. When he said adult child, there was no condescension in it, only acknowledgement. He apologized for any distress caused by his earlier call. He said he had been operating with incomplete information. He said my dad had not been transparent. Then he added one last line. It was soft, almost reluctant, as though he knew he was crossing the border between the professional and the personal. He said, I hope you know this is not your burden to carry. I thanked him. It felt strange to thank a man who had, only an hour earlier, implied that I undo everything I had done to protect myself. But that is what happens when the truth finally enters a room. People rearrange themselves around it. When the call ended, I placed the phone on the table and let out a long, steady breath. It felt like the air in my lungs had been held for days without me noticing. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time since my dad's 3 a.m. message, the balance of pressure had changed. The threat of legal action evaporated. The lawyer was gone. The leverage had dissolved. All that remained was my dad, and his silence, and the consequences he had set in motion without understanding the weight of them. I picked up my coffee again and walked to the window. A dog walker passed by, moving at an easy pace, the leash loose, the dog stopping to sniff along the edge of the sidewalk. The world outside carried on as if nothing in my life had ruptured. Cars rolled past. A woman jogged by with her hair pulled back tight. A pair of teenagers cut across the corner, laughing about something small and forgettable. My phone buzzed once more, but this time I let it go without checking. The urgency had shifted, not away from me, but away from the fear my dad hoped to create. There is a moment in every conflict that reveals the truth about power. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed in a tired lawyer's voice. Sometimes it takes the shape of a man backing out of a situation he realizes could cost him his professional integrity. Sometimes it is nothing more than the sudden clarity that the person trying to control you no longer have the tools to do so. I stood at the window until the coffee cooled again in my hands. Outside, the day brightened. Inside, something in me steadied in a way it had not before. For the first time, the threat was gone, and what remained was only the truth. Sharp and unavoidable, waiting for whatever came next. The quiet in my apartment held steady after the lawyer's call ended, almost too steady, like the air right before a summer storm, when everything feels charged and waiting. I stood there a little longer, watching the street below through the window, sipping what remained of my cold coffee, trying to understand why my hands felt so still. No shaking. No rush of adrenaline, just a strange, clean kind of awareness settling into my bones. Eventually, I sat down again, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen, as if the answers might float to the surface on their own. They did not. But habit carried my hand to the browser, and logic carried me to the one place I had avoided checking for years. My dad's financial trail. I did not know exactly what I expected to find, but something in me understood this part of the story would not end at the hospital, or with the lawyer's withdrawal. Whatever had been set in motion started long before the mortgage, long before the screening, long before that 3 a.m. message that split Christmas apart. I logged into the joint financial folder my dad and I had used loosely over the years. It was not truly shared, more of a digital junk drawer where he had once uploaded tax documents and insurance forms before forgetting it existed. I knew the password because he had picked something he imagined was clever, the street address of the house he had bought using my name as his ladder. Dilworth Lane, 1203. The numbers typed themselves under my fingers like a routine I had been rehearsing, without meaning to. The folder opened. Most of it was clutter. Outdated statements from banks he no longer used, copies of insurance forms, old medical bills, but in the corner was a single folder with a name so plain it should have blended. In. Transfers. I clicked it. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to what I was seeing. Row after row of small payments. Not enormous ones, not enough to trigger obvious suspicion, but consistent. Monthly, sometimes bi-weekly. The amounts varied slightly, like he was trying to avoid patterns. $300 here, $600 there, occasionally more, occasionally less, but always going to the same account number, an account not connected to any of his known expenses. My throat tightened, not from emotion exactly, but from recognition. I had seen this pattern before, not in my family, but in the work I used to do part-time for a financial consulting firm during college. Slow drip payments to a dependent you do not want anyone else to notice. It is a classic shape, the financial signature of a person trying to keep a secret alive. At the top of one transfer description was a note I almost missed. It said, LH. 2 letters, that was all. LH, Lucas Hale. I pushed back from the table. The chair legs scraped softly across the floor. For a moment I felt unsteady in my own skin, as though someone had reached backward through time and rewritten pieces of my childhood while I slept. My dad had been sending Lucas money. Not sporadically, not impulsively, systematically, for years. I scrolled further. The earliest payment was almost 8 years old, $50. Then another, then $200, then $500, then back down. An inconsistent pattern with a consistent goal, keeping someone afloat without drawing too much attention. The amounts increased around the time my dad retired from his job at the hardware store. Not by much, but enough that I could see the strain. His retirement income was never large. He once told me that the cost of living would take most of it, and that he would have to be careful. What he did not say was that the reason he had to be careful was because Lucas was quietly draining whatever remained. Another document opened under my cursor almost by accident. A scanned letter from his retirement account. It showed a withdrawal penalty from several years earlier. A substantial one. Enough to raise every alarm bell in my mind. Enough to explain why he needed me to co-sign the mortgage. Why his credit score had fallen. Why the retirement balance he claimed to have was a fraction of what he once had promised. He had emptied it, piece by piece. To send money to a son he told me was dead. I found myself laughing under my breath. Not because anything about this was funny, but because of the sheer absurdity of the math. While I had been living in a third-floor walk-up, paying nearly $2,000 every month toward a mortgage I did not own, canceling vacations, buying off-brand groceries, cutting corners, saving every spare dollar like it might save me someday, my dad had been funneling what little he had to someone I had only heard about in past tense. The replacement child. That thought rose slowly, not as an epiphany, but as a recognition of something I had already known without naming it. I had grown up believing I was filling an emotional void for a loss that had been too heavy for my parents to talk about. But the truth curled in deeper. I had not only been raised to take the emotional place of a brother I never met, I had been raised to take his financial place too. There it was, quiet and sharp. I clicked through more pages, more transfers, more depletion. Letters from the retirement plan warning him that repeated withdrawals would reduce his long-term stability. A notification advising him to seek financial counseling. A tax document showing early withdrawal penalties that must have hurt more than he ever admitted. He had accepted all of those penalties, swallowed them, without hesitation, and then presented me with a mortgage he could not carry without me. A small part of me tried to summon compassion for him. Addiction is a complicated thing, and if Lucas had struggled, if he had needed help, maybe my dad had told himself he was doing the right thing, that he was being loyal to a son who had lost his way. But compassion only works when it moves in all directions. My dad's loyalty had never flowed toward me with that same urgency. When I had told him years ago that I might move out of Charlotte to take a job in Raleigh, he called me selfish for wanting something different. When I mentioned wanting to travel with friends, he reminded me of the mortgage payment. When I asked if he could take over a portion of the bill so I could save for my own future, he said he was doing the best he could. The best he could was $600 to Lucas. In the same month, he told me he could not contribute even $100. I shut the laptop gently, as if the information inside it needed time to settle. I walked to the kitchen sink and turned on the tap. The sound of running water steadied me. These were facts, not assumptions. Documentation, not suspicions. The kind of evidence that does not shift under emotional pressure. I let the water run until it grew warm, then splashed my face. For a moment, the steam fogged the lower edge of the window above the sink, and I watched as the condensation blurred the neighborhood beyond. A soft image. A softened truth. But when I wiped the glass with the edge of my hand, the world sharpened again. I returned to the table and opened the laptop once more. One more folder waited at the bottom of the screen. It was labeled Home. Probably benign. Probably old renovation receipts or inspection reports, but the part of me that knew better clicked it anyway. Inside were 3 files. The first was the inspection report from when he bought the house. The second was a property tax document. The third was a saved draft of an email addressed to the mortgage lender. I opened it. It read like the beginning of a plea. He had written to them about wanting to refinance the house so he could remove me from the loan. Someday. He said he was working toward improving his financial situation. He said he expected to be able to handle the payments on his own in the near future. Unsaved, unsent, maybe even a lie he told himself on the days when the weight of what he had done pressed too heavily on him. But one line sat at the center of the email, isolated, almost like a confession. My daughter saved us. Without her, we would have lost everything. I stared at it, waiting for some emotional shift that did not come. I did not feel pride. I did not feel anger. I felt something closer to clarity, the kind that settles when illusions finally release their grip. He had built a life on borrowed structure, and I had been the scaffolding he attached everything to. I closed the email. A realization moved into place with a quiet finality. I had not been the daughter who stepped in to help my dad during a difficult period. I had been the contingency plan he relied on while he drained his resources for a son he could not let go of. I had been the replacement in every way, emotionally, functionally, financially. I rested my elbows on the table, folded my hands, and let the silence deepen. The apartment felt different now. Not colder, not warmer, just more honest. A place where the truth could sit openly without being pushed aside for anyone else's comfort. Through the window, the light shifted, a slow wash of late afternoon settling across the buildings outside. People walked by carrying grocery bags. A couple argued softly near a parked car. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at something I could not see. Life kept moving, all around me, unbothered by the quiet collapse of someone else's illusions. I sat there until the phone vibrated again. Not the harsh demand of earlier calls, just a single buzz. A text this time. I did not reach for it. Not yet. I already knew who it would be, and I already knew that whatever my dad said now would come too late to change them. Shape of what I had uncovered. I stayed at the table a moment longer, both hands palms down against the wood, anchoring myself in the simplest truth of the day. I had not destroyed anything. I had only stopped holding up what was already broken, and the weight of that was finally no longer mine to carry. My phone kept buzzing on the table, that same soft vibration every few minutes, but I let it sit untouched while the daylight thinned across my apartment. By the time I finally picked it up, the sky had gone that muted gray that always settles over Charlotte in late winter. The message was short, from my dad. He wrote that we need to talk. Coffee, anywhere you pick. There was no apology, no explanation. Just a request pushed through whatever mess he had created. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed a single reply. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at Willow Creek Coffee. Come alone. He wrote back within seconds. I will. The next morning I drove to the shop a little earlier than I needed to. Willow Creek sits on the edge of a small commercial block in Dilworth, the kind of place where retirees read newspapers at the window and young moms gather around strollers talking about preschool wait lists. I parked, walked in, and ordered a black coffee. Nothing fancy. My stomach was too tight for anything else. I picked a table near the corner where I could see the door. The warmth of the shop felt almost too gentle, too kind for what I knew was coming. I wrapped my hands around the paper cup and waited. He arrived a few minutes past 10. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way a person shrinks when the world they built no longer holds. His shoulders slumped inward, and his face carried the exhaustion of someone who had not slept well for too many nights. He spotted me, lifted a hand like he was afraid I might wave him off, and then walked over. He sat down without waiting for me to invite him. For a moment, he only looked at me, his hands clasped tightly on the table as though he needed to hold on to something that would not move. I expected him to start. Instead, he waited. Maybe he sensed that whatever script he prepared would not survive the next 5 minutes. So I spoke first. I told him I knew about the money, not in a dramatic way, just the facts, the transfers, the withdrawals from his retirement account, the early penalties, the quiet, steady stream of support he had funneled into a life I had been told was gone. He'd always been terrible at hiding what he felt. His eyes darted, then dropped. I watched him inhale slowly, like he needed to gather whatever pieces of honesty remained in him. He said he never meant to hurt me, that Lucas had needed help and he was trying to give it without drawing attention, that he assumed I would not understand. I told him he was right about one thing. I did not understand. Not the secrecy, not the deception, not the way he had folded me into his financial life while pushing me out of them, emotional one, not the way he had treated me like a structural beam instead of a daughter. He let the words hit him, but his posture stayed rigid. He said he had been desperate. He said Lucas had not asked for money, not at first. He said he thought he could keep everyone safe if he managed things quietly. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because the explanation itself did not surprise me. Desperation does strange things, especially when someone is trying to rewrite the past they cannot bear to accept. I asked him why he lied about the screening. Why did he let the hospital staff prepare paperwork in his name when the recipient was someone else entirely? He didn't look up when he answered. He said he thought if he told me the truth up front, I would refuse. He needed me to see it through. He said he was afraid I would walk away. I let out a breath that felt like I had been holding it for years. Afraid I would walk away. He had never considered that the lie itself was the walking away. His, not mine. The conversation settled into a quiet stretch after that. Cups clinked around us. A barista called out a caramel latte for someone at the counter. A couple laughed at the next table. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary morning. They felt out of place. I finally leaned forward and told him plainly what I had told the lender when I initiated the reassessment. That I could no longer carry the mortgage. That what he built on my back had come due. That he had two options now, and both were real, adult solutions. He could sell the house, or he could refinance it entirely in his name, if he could qualify. Which, given everything I had discovered, he could not. I saw the panic rise in him before he pushed it back down. His voice wavered slightly. He asked me what I expected him to do. He asked me how I could just walk away from him. He asked me if any of it meant anything to me. The old version of myself might have folded under that kind of plea. I might have apologized for upsetting him. I might have offered a compromise. I might have tried to soothe him the way a child soothes an unpredictable parent. But that version of me no longer existed. Not after the hospital. Not after the transfers. Not after the lawyer. Not after the truth finally forced its way into the open. I told him the truth, that I was not walking away from him. I was stepping out of a role I never agreed to fill. The replacement. The safety net. The daughter who existed to prop up the pieces of a life he refused to face. He blinked hard, as if the words were brighter than the room. He asked if I was really willing to let him lose the house. I told him houses are replaceable. People are not. And somewhere along the way, he had flipped that truth upside down. He shook his head. His voice cracked when he said he could not start over. That he was too old. That selling the house would be the same as giving up. That he needed time. That he needed me. The final plea landed the way a pebble lands in a river. It sank without changing the current. I reached for my coat draped over the back of the chair. He watched the motion with something like disbelief, as though he had not imagined that this conversation could end with me standing up. I told him calmly that my decision was not up for renegotiation, that he had built a life on promises he never intended to keep, that it was time he lived inside the consequences of the choices he made. I stood. The chair legs scraped lightly against the floor. He reached out instinctively, not to grab me, but as if he wanted to pull back the moment. His hand hovered for a second before he let it fall. He said my name softly, almost a whisper. I paused long enough to meet his eyes. What he saw there must have startled him. Not anger, not sorrow, just the steady acceptance of someone who finally understands the boundary she never had permission to draw. I told him I hoped he chose the option that hurt him least. Then I turned and walked toward the door. Outside, the air was cool and the sky clear. People moved around me carrying shopping bags and cardboard coffee trays, headed toward the rest of their Saturday. I took one slow breath, then another. My feet felt steady on the sidewalk. Behind me, the door to the coffee shop opened for a moment, letting out a rush of warmth and voices before closing again. I did not look back. Some endings do not need ceremony. Some simply require you to stand up, step outside, and live in the space you finally made for yourself. I walked away from the coffee shop without looking back, and for the first time in a long time, the world around me felt level. No tilting, no undertow, just the sidewalk under my feet and the sharp winter air that carried the faint smell of cinnamon from the bakery next door. I drove home slowly, not because I was tired, but because there was nothing left to rush. The next week unfolded in small, steady pieces. The lender sent my dad the formal reassessment notice. He called once, then twice, then stopped calling altogether. Silence is a strange thing when it comes from someone who used to fill every quiet with his own explanations. I thought maybe he had decided to refinance, that he was searching for some last-minute solution, but the truth arrived in the form of a polite email from the realtor he hired. He listed the house. The market in Charlotte had been strong for months, and the place on Dilworth Lane was exactly the kind of property that attracted buyers looking for something that felt settled and suburban. 3 bedrooms, a yard he never landscaped, a porch swing he never sat on. Notice. It sold in less than 14 days. I saw the closing documents only because my name appeared in the early stages of the transaction, and they wanted confirmation that the reassessment notice had been satisfied. When that final attachment arrived, something inside me eased. Not joy, not triumph, just a quiet shift, as if a weight I had carried without recognizing its shape finally set itself down. My mom reached out a few days later. She left a voicemail. I played it twice because I could not decide what emotion she was trying to express. Her voice trembled around the edges, but not in a way that felt like grief, more like confusion, or maybe the ache of someone who had stayed neutral for so long she no longer remembered how to speak plainly. She said she was sorry things had gone this far. She said she wished she had known how to help. She said my dad was having a hard time. She said she hoped I would be home for the holidays next year. It was the first time she had ever said next year instead of this year. A small shift, but I noticed it. I texted her back. I kept it brief. I told her I hoped she was doing all right. I told her I was taking time for myself. I told her I loved her in the way a child still loves the person who taught her to tie her shoes, but not how to speak up when she needed to. I did not mention Christmas. The day after the house sold, I received a short message from a number I did not recognize. The text said, "This is Lucas. I assumed you knew the house was sold. I just wanted to say I am sorry for the position this put you in. I am not asking for anything." I read it twice, then a third time. The sentence, "I am not asking for anything," was the one that stayed with me. Not because I believed he was innocent in the choices he had made over the years, but because it was the first time anyone in my family had ever spoken to me without attaching a request, a favor, a burden, or a piece of their own survival. I wrote back one line. "I hope you take care of yourself." He did not reply, and I did not expect him to. In the weeks that followed, my life steadied into a rhythm I had not known I needed. Work still demanded the same deadlines, the same meetings, the same spreadsheets, but something in the way I showed up had shifted. I no longer felt like I was bracing for impact every time my phone buzzed. My apartment felt larger. My evenings felt quieter in a way that did not hollow me out. I even started putting up small pieces of pottery on the shelf near my kitchen window, little bowls and imperfect mugs I had made in a class I had taken twice a month for nearly a year. For the first time, those pieces felt like they belonged to me instead of some hidden corner of my life. Spring came and went. The summer heat settled across the city. My dad moved into a small one-story rental near the airport, a place he never invited me to and I never asked to see. We spoke twice in those months, short conversations, surface-level topics, weather, work, groceries. He sounded tired, but not in the dramatic way he had sounded tired before, more like someone learning to stand without leaning on whatever structure used to hold him up. By fall, our communication thinned again. Not cold, not fractured, just quiet. Then December arrived. It did not creep up the way Christmas used to when I was a kid. No decorated boxes in the hallway closet. No plans for a dinner no one really enjoyed. No tree dragged from the garage and decorated with the same fragile ornaments we had avoided touching for years. This December came in clean, simple. Like a room with open windows letting in cold air that clears everything it touches. 1 year had passed since my dad's message at 3 a.m. that split my life down the center. 1 year since I wrote, I understood, and went back to sleep. 1 year since the mortgage notice. 1 year since the hospital. 1 year since I stopped being the replacement, in every sense of the word. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee out of a ceramic mug I had made myself. The glaze settled unevenly near the handle, but the imperfection felt honest. I was hosting my own Christmas later that day. Small, quiet, mine. I had invited a few friends, the kind of people whose presence does not require performance. People who do not traffic in obligation. I had set out a simple menu. Nothing heavy. Soup, bread, a small casserole dish with rosemary chicken. No traditions I felt bound to defend. Just a day shaped by my own hands. My dad had been invited too. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but because I wanted the invitation to come from choice, not from an old habit. I had worded the message carefully. If you would like to come by for Christmas dinner, you are welcome. It will be quiet. No expectations, just food and space. If you need time, I understand. He replied that he would come if he felt up to it. That was all. The day moved easily, the way days do when they are not braced against someone else's emotional weather. I cooked slowly, moving through the kitchen like the room belonged to me. Music played from an old speaker near the counter. Soft, instrumental, nothing dramatic. My friends arrived around 4 in the afternoon. They brought small gifts, a candle, a jar of homemade jam, a scarf in a color I would never have picked myself, but liked anyway. We talked, we laughed. We ate at the table near the window that overlooked the street. It felt like a life assembled from quiet pieces, each one fitting where it was meant to go. Around 6, the doorbell rang. The room fell silent, and for a moment, no one moved. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked to the door. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I opened it slowly. My dad stood there holding a small paper bag. He looked older than he had at the coffee shop. Not defeated, just weathered by the months that had passed. He said he hoped the time was still all right. I told him it was. He stepped inside and removed his coat. He greeted my friends politely, uncertainly, as if he was walking through a place he did not quite know how to inhabit. He handed me the paper bag. Inside was a box of peppermint chocolates I used to love as a kid, the same brand he used to buy every December when I was small, a gesture from another life. Dinner was careful, but peaceful. He spoke little. Mostly he listened. He asked about my work, my pottery class, the glaze I had used on the mug near the window. I answered without the weight that used to sit between us. There was a moment near the end of the evening when he looked around the table, his eyes settling on the food, the lights, the small pieces of a holiday that did not orbit around anyone but me. It struck me then that this was the first Christmas I had ever shaped for myself. Not inherited, not performed, not obligated. Chosen. When the evening wound down, he stood and put on his coat. He said, "Thank you for having me." The words were simple, but they carried a sincerity I had not heard from him before. I walked him to the door. He paused there, looking at me in a way that felt different from the old searching gaze he used to give when he wanted something. This look carried something quieter, something like understanding, or at least the beginning of it. He said he knew rebuilding anything between us would take time. I nodded. He said he did not expect me to forget what had happened. I nodded again. He said he hoped that if he kept showing up the right way, someday the space between us might not feel so wide. I told him space is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it is where people finally learn to stand without leaning on someone else's bones. He gave a small, tired smile. Then he said goodnight and stepped into the cold. I closed the door gently and leaned against it for a moment, not because I needed support, but because the stillness felt earned. My friends were washing dishes in the kitchen. The lights were soft. The aroma of rosemary lingered in the air. It felt like a room I had grown into, rather than a room I was trying to fit inside. 1 year. That was all it took to remake a life when the truth finally had room to breathe. Later that night, after everyone left and the apartment quieted, I sat on the couch with a blanket over my lap and let myself take in the fullness of the day. Not perfect, not mended, but honestly. And in that honesty, there was a kind of peace I had not known I was missing. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.